Good afternoon, everyone. The National Park Service would like to welcome you to this virtual civic engagement meeting for the Yellowstone National Park North Entrance Road project. I'm Nicole Denherter with ERO Resources, and I will be moderating the meeting. First, we'll go over instructions for the webinar. Next slide, please. All participants will remain muted during the presentation and Q&A session, but the chat room will be available for the duration of the presentation and at the end of the presentation. During the webinar, we will be posting messages to participants such as a Zoom webinar tutorial and troubleshooting, a Q&A how to submit comments on the project, and a link to the project website. You can also send your questions about Zoom in the chat box to Lily Peralt. Lastly, captions will be activated during the presentation, and you can refer to the chat box or send a message to Lily Peralt for assistance with the captions. I will now turn it over to the Yellowstone National Park Superintendent, Cam Shawley, for today's presentation.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that. Oh, hello to everybody. It's like we have a good group here to go over this presentation and kind of see where we are at this point, which is hard to believe, 20 months from the flood event. So in June, it'll be 2 years, which it's crazy how fast time has gone by. Really appreciate so many of you who've shown interest in what we're doing post-flood. And, I think it was a incredible team effort with Federal Highways and the communities and counties and states, and everyone came together back in 2022 to get the job done from a short-term reconstruction perspective and get these 2 major corridors rebuilt and reconnected. As I've communicated with the press and with many of you, that was kind of one chapter, just the short-term recovery post-flood. And we've been working hard over the last almost 2 years, kind of think about the future and think about what a permanent road would look like between here and Gardiner. And, a lot of thought needs to go into that. It's a big investment. We all care deeply about this place, and protecting this place is extremely important. We want to make sure that any investments that we're making are good investments for the future, are resilient to, future climate events that may occur. And I think that, it's really important that we take our time and get it right. And you play a big part in helping us get it right. I can't even count the number of people who've reached out to me in various forms over the last 2 years about, don't go back through the canyon, or go back through the canyon, or whatever the case might be. And as with everything in Yellowstone, there's no shortage of opinions. And like I said, it's very valuable for us to get your engagement on this. And this is just the first opportunity that you'll have to see kind of where we are now, what we're thinking, and provide us feedback. So this by no means is, the last opportunity for that. So really the purpose of the day is to present the alternatives as they stand today, and then engage and solicit ideas from you on what your thoughts are on the alternatives at this point, things that you think we should be thinking about for the future. There's been plenty of conversations that we've had with people and new ideas about the way we should be looking at things, and it's really helpful to us. So we appreciate your engagement greatly. So we've got a slide deck here. It's not too long. It's got a couple videos in it. There's probably a spectrum of people on here that on the one end are super familiar with what happened in 2022, and they're really familiar with the old North Entrance Road and what happened with the flood and the rebuild of the old Gardiner Road. And then there's probably on the other side of the spectrum a number of you who aren't as familiar. We've tried to balance this in a way that can give kind of a good background for those that may not be completely up to speed. And I think the most important thing is we'll get to a Q&A after we're done with this. And I've got an incredible team here. Too many people to introduce right now, but big component with the National Park Service and our engineers and our planners and project managers, and then Federal Highways, who's been, just as I said, a tremendous partner. They're also on here to answer any questions that you might have from their perspective. And this is something that we're doing jointly with Federal Highways. They're terrific partners, and help us not only with the things we've been dealing with post flood, but obviously with a lot of the other transportation infrastructure improvements that we've been making in the park. Let's see here. I think everybody knows where Yellowstone is, but if you don't, there it is, northwest corner of Wyoming. 96% of it or so are in the state of Wyoming, 3% in Montana, 1% in the state of Idaho. Many of you have seen this map of the park before, and we'll be focusing our conversation today on this north entrance road here between Mammoth and Gardiner. You know that the northeast entrance road was also substantially impacted during the flood. We'll have a separate process for that later. So the focus of today is really about what the long-term permanent road is going to be for the roughly 5 miles between here and Gardiner, Montana. North entrance is the second busiest entrance in the park. Regularly in the summer can see traffic counts of 3,000 cars per day. And we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, we've built the old Gardiner Road. One of the biggest questions, well, two questions. One is, we built this road in 2022. We spent $25 million, give or take. Why not just use that as the road? And we'll explain why that may not be feasible. And then the other question that we get regularly is, are you going to revert, if you don't use the old Gardiner Road, are you going to shift it back to the way it was pre-flood? That would probably take about $15 million just to do that. It may not be the best option. It might be good to have some redundancy, but we'll talk a little bit about that, and happy to hear your thoughts. So we'll be focused right here for the rest of this presentation. After going into the fall of 22, I really asked for the engineers and Federal Highways and the Park Service team to look at every possible location that a road could be built. Not that you would, but if you could, where could you build a road? And they came up with roughly 6 different alternatives. And we've gone through multiple processes internally to kind of apply criteria to those 6, and we've eliminated 3 of them. We can talk about the 3 that were eliminated, but they were basically eliminated because they were either too heavy of an impact on, say, wildlife habitat, or it would have been too costly, or visual impacts, based on where the road would have been constructed. We want to be cognizant of all of these different factors that you see here on the screen. Impacts to natural, cultural, and geologic resources, evaluate what impacts there are to threatened and endangered species. We take very seriously, as you've seen with a lot of the road improvements that we've made in Yellowstone, the visitor experience and, engineering considerations. And we'll touch on engineering considerations in a bit, because that's a pretty big one with this corridor. The soils are relatively unstable. They're shifting. If you know where Mount Sepulchre is, there's a kind of a soil shift that's occurring from west to east. That shift can be pretty substantial, depending on where you want to build a road. The old Gardiner Road's in the middle of that as well. And so we've done a considerable amount of geotechnical work, and that's ongoing to kind of measure what that movement looks like. And that's going to really help drive some of the decision-making regarding the engineering around whatever alternative that we end up picking. The visual impacts are a big one to all of us. I think the old Gardiner Road is, one of the biggest fears I had when we decided to make that a 2-lane was that it would significantly cut into the landscape. the engineers and contractors, I think, did a really good job of kind of creating that road in a way that lays kind of lightly on the landscape. But as we look at potentially building a second road or rebuilding, we want to be really cognizant of the visual impacts. Costs are obviously something we need to factor. It's great that we've gotten substantial amounts of flood recovery funding from Congress and the administration to put to work once we decide on what the alternatives are going to look like. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to take, and I know this is on a lot of your minds, the worst thing we could do, even though this is a 1 in 500 year event, we all know that there's a very good likelihood that'll something like that will occur sooner than 500 years. What are the investments that we want to make, and how do we take into consideration what some of those future possibilities might be, floods or other things, and that's going to be a big part and has been a big part of the conversation around these alternatives. So we've got a little video here I'm going to show you for just some background. It's narrated.
On the morning of June 13th, 2022, Yellowstone National Park and surrounding areas experienced a 500-year flood event. The flood destroyed several sections of the North Entrance Road within the park between Mammoth Hot Springs, Wyoming, and Gardiner, Montana. Federal Highway Administration and National Park Service teams immediately began assessing the damage and making a plan to restore access. The old Gardiner Road, now the current North Entrance Road, was identified as a temporary solution, but it required major improvements before it could be opened to the public. Constructed in 1879, the old Gardiner Road was the original entrance road to Yellowstone until it was replaced in 1884. This temporary solution opened to the public on October 30th, 2022, only 4 months after the flood. Following the completion of improvements to the current North Entrance Road, Federal Highway Administration and National Park Service teams began looking at options for a long-term solution. Numerous alternatives were assessed, and 3 alternative alignments are still under consideration. The 3 alternatives are Old Gardiner Road / temporary North Entrance Road alignment, the Canyon alignment, and center alignment.
So we're going to go over these individually, but I don't think it's a big shocker that the only real new one to many of you might be the center alignment. So the red would be a rebuild through the canyon where the road was pre-flood. The blue would be significantly improving the road that we built in 2022 on the old Gardiner Road. And then that purple, which we're calling the center alternative, it takes advantage of the road between Mammoth and the Gardiner River down near Boiling River. And then it veers off and stays out of the canyon. One of the other criteria that we wanted to try to look at was where we might be able to take advantage of infrastructure that wasn't affected by the flood, and or take advantage of any portions of the old Gardiner Road that we improved. So these are general, and we'll give you kind of a specific look at each one here. But they could move around one direction or another, but these are the general 3 main alternatives that we're evaluating right now.
The canyon alignment would follow the previous pre-flood north entrance road alignment and include several bridges through the Gardiner River Canyon. Bridges would be constructed for river crossings, rockfall protection, and landslide protection. The proposed roadway would widen the pre-flood entrance road from a 22-foot width to the park standard 30-foot width.
So the one thing about the canyon, I don't need to tell anybody, obviously that would have to be built if we did go back to the canyon to be resilient to another flood event. I'm confident that we could do that. We got to look at some of those other factors, though. It'd probably be pretty expensive. Most of you that have been on that road know that there are some fairly significant rockfall zones. And I think probably a big thing for us to be cognizant of is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build a road through there and, have it collapse from the top through, cliffs that collapse or rockfall and that kind of thing. So we'll be looking at that as we evaluate whether or not this is a good option to move forward with.
The temporary north entrance road would be widened from the existing 22-foot width to the park standard 30-foot width. Existing retaining and draining structures would also be replaced or enlarged to fit the wider road. The current steepness and tight curves would be modified to improve safety and drivability. For a better connection to the north entrance station, the roadway would be realigned on the approach into Gardiner, Montana.
So this road was I think everybody was impressed with how quickly it was built, roughly 4 months. It was really the only option that we had that would have, going back to the canyon would have taken years. So it was the right decision at the time. The unfortunate part, because of the constraints we had time-wise to build this, it wasn't necessarily engineered to modern day standards. It did a great job, don't get me wrong. It's a safe road. It worked well. Last year was the first year, full year in use. It's probably outperformed our expectations in many ways. If you've been on it, it is steep. There are, a lot of curves and things like that obviously wouldn't be the best for the future road. So, we're going to look at this and we'll take into consideration, the sliding soils that I mentioned. One major concern with building this and modernizing this corridor, this alignment, is it would be a pretty significant impact on visitors coming in the north entrance, probably for 3 to 5 years in that range. And it's something for us to just factor in. We try to, we have a lot of projects going on around the park. We really try to spread those projects out and contract them in ways that are going to be minimize impacts. And there's be no way around, if we were to rebuild this to modern day standards, there being pretty significant multi-year traffic disruptions for like I said, for visitors coming in. So that's not the only consideration, but that is something that we need to think about if we look at this as an alternative. And then the last one.
The center road alignment would follow the pre-flood north entrance road for 2 miles north from Mammoth, Wyoming, where a proposed bridge would provide a high crossing of the Gardiner River. The road would travel northwest to pass west of Slide Lake, aligning with the current north entrance road for a short segment. The road would then veer northeast towards the pre-flood north entrance road on the approach into the north entrance station in Gardiner, Montana. The proposed roadway would widen to include the park standard 30-foot width.
So the nice thing about this is it stays out of the canyon. It takes advantage of the 2 miles or so of road from Mammoth down to the Gardiner River. That we would improve that as well. This could be executed as a completely separate kind of contract that would be separate from it would not affect visitors coming in. Visitors would continue to use the old Gardiner Road while this was being constructed. Visually, it's pretty hidden overall, and look at the habitat impacts and things like that. And the engineering components and the sliding soils will be a big factor in this one as well. So those are generally the three alternatives. We've got geotechnical assessments that are happening and have been happening. And let's see. Thanks, Bob, for sending this to me. Drilled in 23, 9 geotechnical borings. So they drilled down in the ground, and we've got experts on here that can explain that better than I can, but it basically is measuring the shift of the soils. And then in 24, we're going to drill another 14 holes, boring holes. So we're going to have a really good idea of where soils are shifting, how much they're shifting, and that kind of thing by the time we get to selecting a preferred alternative. We'll also do many other surveys that we commonly do with any type of road or road project or other major project. So we have this meeting with you here on the 12th, and we'll have another one on Wednesday night. These once again are kind of pre-scoping preliminary meetings just to familiarize you with what we're thinking. We're going to do a considerable amount of tribal engagement as well. We'll launch in and develop an environmental assessment, select a preferred alternative, hopefully sometime this summer. And then we'll start that process. We'll release that for public comment review sometime this fall with a decision probably about this time next year is generally the plan. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Nicole, and we can start some Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Cam. We will now transition to the Q&A session for the civic engagement presentation. And the park invites you to ask your questions now during this session. So to submit a comment or question, you can type and submit your questions to Emily Corsi in the chat window or box on your screen. If you do need technical assistance with using the Zoom, please chat Lily Peralt. All right, looks like we have a couple of questions in here, so I'll go ahead and get started on these. All right, the first question is in 2013, Colorado experienced a month-long rain event in September with road washouts up and down the Front Range. Included was the Big Thompson Canyon, which flooded in the 1970s and had been rebuilt at that time. Colorado had to rebuild the highway in Big Thompson Canyon again due to the flooding in 2013. It's likely, even with significant shoring and rock protection, that you'll face the same rebuilding effort along the river again. I'd like to ask Bob Camel to respond to that comment.
Sure, thanks, Nicole. Hi, I'm Bob Camel. I'm Chief of Professional Services here in Yellowstone. And that's a great question. And our design team is studying a lot of these kind of climate change issues around vulnerability and resiliency of infrastructure. We've got a lot to learn as we move forward. We are looking at the frequency and intensity of storms as they relate to the corridor and what that means in terms of these three alignments and corridors. We're very focused on landslides, rock fall, and some of the relationships of those kind of natural occurring events with the infrastructure that's being proposed. But again, we are going to be focused on learning more and studying how these more intense, more frequent storms are going to impact the soils, the vegetation, the hydrology of the river, and that impact in relationship to our infrastructure.
All right, thank you, Bob. The next question that we have, would any of these options restore access to the boiling river? And Bob, I'm going to ask you to answer that one again.
Restore access to Boiling River. I think right now the park's position on the Boiling River is that it's going to remain closed. We do have a couple of alternatives that have a close relationship to the Boiling River area and the Boiling River parking location. We are looking at some ideas in that general area around some parking and maybe some picnicking opportunities. But as far as the Boiling River as kind of a bathing opportunity, I'll let Cam, maybe you want to address that, but I don't believe that's in the parks.
Well, it's gone. It's gone. It's not the boiling. The swim area at Boiling is no longer after the flood. The river completely moved over to the other side. So, we can have conversations downstream around what that might look like. I think to answer the question directly, both the canyon alternative and the center alternative would take access right down that same corridor. We would continue to have those parking areas there that were traditionally there for fishermen, for what was the former Boiling swimming area. Even if we were to select the old Gardiner Road, we still intend to maintain the road down to the Gardiner River to provide access. We would need to figure out how that would look if it was a dead end, so to speak. But those are conversations that we can have moving forward.
Thank you. All right, next question is, what will happen to existing infrastructure that isn't used? Bob, that's another one for you. Thanks.
I think, each alternative has some benefits to what could or couldn't remain if we select one. So I think we're going to look at, Cam mentioned just now that if the OGR was selected, that there'd probably be an element of the existing north entrance road that will remain to provide access to Boiling River, possibly even further into the canyon as a trail. If we select one of the other two alternatives and the old Gardiner Road isn't selected, we could look at that too as a possible hike bike scenario or a operational fallback road access for the park. Those are all scenarios that we're going to be looking at as we evaluate each alternative by itself, and what infrastructure can remain to best support the park, continue to provide a meaningful experience to the public as we go forward.
So if we don't select the canyon option, we will have a plan to remove all of the asphalt and infrastructure out of the canyon. And as Bob said, and this is just a good thing for all of you to think about if you've got ideas, because there's been a lot. I'll tell you some of them. It doesn't mean we're going for the press that's on the line. This is just preliminary, but let's say we selected the center option, and the question became, what do you do with the old Gardiner Road? That could be a service road. That could be, a bike path type thing. One other option that someone brought up was, could that turn into a two-lane, one-way road in? So traffic entering Mammoth would come in on the old Gardiner Road, and then traffic exiting Mammoth would go down and out the center alignment. Those are all things to think about. If you've got some new idea, love to hear it. I don't know that it's worth spending, like I said earlier, 15 million plus to undo what we did in 22 and turn it back into a one-lane dirt road. I think there's some value in having some redundancy. You obviously can't have two roads at every entrance, but in this particular case, may not be the worst idea. If something were to happen downstream, we'd have a backup road. We were very fortunate to have the old Gardiner Road available to us. If we didn't have that, we'd probably been looking at multiple years of Gardiner being cut off from the park. So I think we should be thinking about a lot of those things, but any other good ideas that you have, we'd like to hear them.
All right, thanks, Cam. Here's another question for you, Cam. Also curious if visitor data was obtained as to the guest/visitor experience on the new road. Any noticeable increase in complaints about car sickness or motion sickness?
I haven't heard of any. I don't know if anybody else on the team has heard that. I mean, I could see where I could see where that might happen. But what I've actually heard is, I mean, if you had a perfect 3 or 4 years to plan out a road, and you probably wouldn't have built it with all those curves and steep grades. I get it. It is what we had to do. On the positive side, I think, it's subjected people to pretty incredible views coming into Mammoth of the park. It's a pretty major wildlife area, so there's a considerable amount of wildlife viewing, and so a lot of positives. But I get it. It's steep and curvy, and I don't think we've got any real solid data on that. We definitely know that over the long term, we need to remove some of the grade or reduce some of the grades and remove some of the steep curve or the curves and things like that. It's a good question though.
All right, thanks, Cam. Bob, this is another one for you. What would be the timeline for building the center option?
I would say a minimum of 3 years, and possibly up to 5. There is a very long bridge structure proposed as part of that solution, and obviously that takes time with design and the construction and delivery of materials and a number of things. But I'd say 3 to 5 years is probably a number to go with. There's some benefits to that alignment in that it could be constructed relatively with low impact to the traveling public. Would be off alignment, so traffic control would be pretty minimal, maybe just at the Gardiner side of the project. But probably 3 to 5. I don't know, Nate Jones from Federal Highway, if Nate would want to offer any other thoughts around that alternative and some of the specifics around some of the structure that may be needed to support that alignment.
Yeah, for the center alternative, I have Nate Jones, Western Federal Lands, Federal Highway. We'd be looking at a high bridge crossing across the Gardiner River at the Gardens location. It'd be a multi-span. We'd have a couple piers in the next to the river channel to get across that area. That would be the primary structure that would be associated with that alternative. Then there's most of the length coming out from the Gardens heading toward Gardiner would be new alignment. Benefit for that one would be it wouldn't be constructed under live traffic. We'd be able to route traffic, like Cam said, on the old Gardiner Road, temporary north entrance road. But yeah, the bridge construction, that would be a major structure. That would be, like Bob said, we'd be looking at 3 to 5 year time frame.
All right, thank you both. Next question. If they decide to utilize the OGR road, will they eliminate the hairpin curves that are impossible for large RVs to negotiate, as they are unable to remain in their lane of travel due to the sharp angle of these curves?
Yeah.
That one, oh, go ahead.
No, I'll let Nate's on. He can answer it, but that's been a major topic of conversation. And if Nate was right there with us and his team in 22 when we built that out. Fortunately, we actually made it wider than we originally were going to in some of those curves, and it's still pretty tricky. So anything we do permanently would straighten those out and widen the roads. Nate, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, both the horizontal alignment, vertical profile, like Cam mentioned, and the emergency response, we had to try to fit best as we could to what was there. In the permanent design, we'll be fitting the geometry of the roadway to AASHTO 25 and 35 mile an hour curves. So that'll be a vast improvement over some of the 10, 15 mile an hour curves, steep grades that we have there now.
All right, thank you. The next question, and this will be for Jennifer Carpenter and Tom James. How do the potential wildlife and archaeological impacts compare and contrast across the 3 alternatives?
So Jennifer Carpenter here, and the chief of the Yellowstone Center for Resources. And that's what we'll be evaluating in the environmental assessment and our NEPA analysis, is comparing and contrasting each of these alternatives in comparison to our impact topics that Cam briefly touched upon in the presentation. We still have some surveys left to complete this summer. I guess I will turn it over to Tom James, who's our archaeologist on this, if he wants to add anything about those ARC surveys.
Yeah, so the archaeological surveys in 1998, the Museum of the Rockies did an archaeological survey out there, and then over the past summer, going into December of 2023, I got back out there, resurveyed those sites just to verify their location. We got 34 sites between here and Gardiner inside of the area that I surveyed. OGR potentially could impact as many as 6. Canyon could potentially impact as many as 4, and the center alignment could potentially hit as many as 14. I think we could probably work around those, but working on a report on findings. It'll be done here in the next week or two, and I'll get it off to our tribal partners and to our state historic preservation officers for their input.
All right, thank you both. The next question, this is going to be for you, Cam. Of the 3 road options, is there an initial option that is near the top of the list, or just too early in the process to make an assumption?
Yeah, I got to be careful there because I don't want to be pre-decisional. I don't want the press to say this is Cam's favorite or anything like that. So, I think each one of the alternatives has pros and cons. There's no perfect alternative. The 3 that we dismissed already, none of those were perfect. I think that, going back through the canyon is something we really need to think hard about whether we want to do it or not. I think that personally, I think getting that canyon restored back to its natural state would be good. I do think it's probably, of the 3, the most expensive and the most vulnerable to future events, either floods, rock slides, whatever the case might be. So, I would just, but each one of them has problems. Like 3 to 5 years of major traffic control on the old Gardiner Road would be a problem. Going through the center alignment, new bridges, and as Tom just mentioned, maybe more impacts on other types of resources. Those are all things that we need to look at. And I wish there was like a standout that was like, hey, this is clearly the best. But right now, I don't think that exists.
All right, thank you, Cam. Another question for you, Cam. It's kind of more of a statement, but I think there is a question in here. If the OGR alternative is chosen and it takes 3 to 6 years of construction, I assume that means there will be the normal 30 plus or minus minute traffic delays, and not totally closing the entrance.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, there probably have to be some, like we have had to do with some of the other major projects where we have short-term temporary closures here and there. We're not far enough along in the engineering and design planning to know exactly what the contractor would require, but I would say there'd be obviously the 20 to 30 minute normal delays for 3 to 5 years on top of potentially short-term closures if they had to do any type of blasting or other things that might be required, where night closures or some of those types of things as we moved along. So it's another thing for us to consider on that alternative.
All right, thank you. Another one for you, Cam. Will there be access to the Rescue Creek Trail with a new bridge over the Gardiner River?
Yes. We know that's really important. We thought we were going to be able to get on that last year. Bob, I don't know if you've got the details on, or Nate, on that bridge at Rescue Creek. I know we were going to kind of shift it up a little bit to get it away from that switchback. I also know there were some other resource concerns in that area. You got what's the latest on that bridge?
Yeah, we've landed on a location, and Nate and his team have just presented to the park the latest round of reviews. But we're moving forward with that. We have money assigned to that under the ERFO program. And so we have a review to do. We have sort of tentatively learned back channels that there are some delays within the industry around prefabricated structures, but we're working on that. Should have something hopefully by the end of the season, if not early next year, but we've made a lot of progress with it.
So whoever it was that asked that question, and you're not the only one that has it, we'll get a more definitive timeline on that. We like I said, we do know that that's a really important from a stock access and crossing perspective. So we'll get some better detail to you on kind of the timelines and that kind of thing. I don't think it'll be up and ready for the summer, clearly, but I think it's something that we can get done once we get everything ironed out fairly quickly, as Bob said, either by the fall or going into next year.
And Cam, any of these three alternatives will provide vehicular access to that trailhead.
Yeah, and if that was the question, I missed it. That's a good point, Bob. Thanks. No matter what happens, we will rebuild Rescue Creek, and there will be access from the north. Sure, point that out, Bob.
All right, thanks, Cam and Bob. The next question, this is for Nate Jones. Of the three alternatives, can you prioritize them according to each alternative's ability to handle flood and soil changes? Is one better than the other?
I'll say the analysis is ongoing. We're conducting a dedicated vulnerability and resilience analysis, taking into consideration climate change models and projections. I could say just at a high level, the OGR and center alternatives are more prone to landslides. As Cam mentioned in the presentation, there's landform movements on the west side of the river. The canyon alternative is obviously more prone to the flood and rockfall hazards, but the analysis is ongoing. It's a dedicated component of the engineering that's going into the project.
Thanks, Nate. Next question, has any consideration been given to adding additional parking areas or scenic overlooks during this process? And this is a question for Bob.
Yes. One of the earlier first slides Cam had up, and we had a list of 5 or 6 kind of design parameters, criteria around the alternatives. And one of them was visitor experience. And I think that's very important to us to look for opportunities where we can provide a parking area or an overlook to be able to experience some of the advantages that each of these alternatives will have individually. So yes, we are looking at that. That is part of our design process and flow, is to seek those opportunities to do that.
All right, thank you. The next question is for Nate Jones. What are the criteria used to select the best alignment with regard to shifting soils, and what is done to mitigate shifting soils?
Let's see, to mitigate shifting soils, there's a couple engineering strategies we'd be utilizing. One of them is just to try to not upset the balance. Try to keep the landslides from shifting underneath us. Try not to add big cuts or fills that are going to upset the balance of where those soils are currently. Another technique we could utilize would be lightweight fills. If we do need to do some profile shifts and do some fills in some sections, we can utilize some lightweight soils to try not to overload some of those landslide formations.
Great, thank you. Next question. Actually, the next 2 questions have to do with the Mammoth Campground, so I'll just go through both of them. Is Mammoth Campground affected by any of the plans? Is it likely to reopen this year? And the other was, will the Mammoth Campground reopen soon? Cam, I don't know if you can answer those.
Yeah. So the reason why it was closed was because it's, as many of you know, that we have 8 to 10 water wastewater systems throughout the park that we manage, that we control and manage. The wastewater for Mammoth was piped under the road through the canyon to the Gardiner plant. When the flood destroyed the road, it destroyed the pipe, and we've got this new temporary $40 million wastewater plant up here now that's been or has allowed us to kind of reopen full services here in Mammoth. The campground, the restrooms in the campground, the water and all that kind of thing were also affected by that. We've got now with this new plant online here in Mammoth, we've got a new pipe run to the new plant from the campground, so that should allow us to open up the campground this season.
Great, thanks. The next question is for Bob. Could you add any new hiking trails or extend trails like beaver ponds?
Yeah. We will obviously look at any existing trail connections as they relate to one or all three of these corridor proposals. And then I think as we go back to some of the dialogue we've been having here on what infrastructure may remain, depending upon which corridor gets picked, I think there'll be opportunities, no matter which solution we arrive at, to utilize portions or some of what is left of either the old Gardiner Road or the existing north entrance road. I think there'll be opportunities there to create some short sections of new trail or some ADA accessible experiences. But we'll be looking at that as we evaluate the proposals, and you know, if there's any ideas around new trails or connecting the trails from folks that are familiar with the park, and we'd love to hear that as it relates to our three corridor proposals.
All right, thank you. Next question, where would the middle alignment split off from the old existing road near the Boiling River parking location? And that question is for Nate.
Where would the middle alignment break off? So it would be right as we're entering the Gardiner River Canyon. So it's as you're heading from Mammoth toward Gardiner, you would cross the Boiling River near its existing location. As you move further to the north toward Gardiner, you would cross the Gardiner River at the area that they call the Gardens. And it was pointed out in the map that Cam showed in his presentation.
All right, thanks, Nate. Next question, this is also for you, Nate. Where would the large bridge presented in the middle option be located?
Yeah, so again, past the Boiling River, this would be a second bridge, and it's right as you're entering the Gardiner Canyon from the south. So instead of going into the canyon where the flood caused the damage, remove the roadway sections, it would cross the Gardiner River over toward the western landscape and head up towards Slide Lake.
Thank you. But that is it for the questions today. Do we have any other questions from the public attending? Here is one other question. Is this recording going to be posted after the meeting? I missed everything except the Q&A because the meeting was full. We are aware of that, and yes, this will be posted very soon after the meeting. Probably this evening or tomorrow morning at the latest.
And we also have another session Wednesday night. Nicole, we should probably talk about whether we want to try to get more seats than we had for this one.
Yes, that will be happening. Yes. Oh, there is one more question. Has any thought been given to creating an elevated roadway through the old canyon alignment, aka Glenwood Canyon I-70 corridor in Colorado, or a la Glenwood Canyon, pardon me, that would reduce rockfall and flood issues and also reduce wildlife issues such as bison walking on the road, bighorn sheep issues, wildlife jams, etc.?
So what's the
sorry,
question? The question is, are we thinking about, have we thought about an elevated structure through the canyon?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, we have. In fact, one of the original, and Nate, you can jump in here and remind me, but one of the original thoughts on that alternative was kind of an elevated structure that basically snaked through the canyon And it would be kind of far enough away from the rockfall zones that the rocks wouldn't affect the roadway. That's not gonna, I mean, I guess if you put a cattle guard or something, maybe wildlife wouldn't get on it. It probably wouldn't solve all the wildlife issues. We kind of moved away from that. Nate, I don't know if you want to kind of jump into our thought process there.
Yeah, we looked into like a viaduct type option, just have the whole canyon section be on structures. It didn't get us away from all the flood hazards. We still have to put those foundations somewhere on piers. Couldn't pull them all the way out of the river. On the west side, we still have landslide formations where we're at the toe, which is a bad place to be for a landslide. Our current thinking is, again, we have a number of structures, bridge structures proposed, but it wouldn't be one continuous structure through the canyon. So the infrastructure that we do have proposed, it would mitigate, avoid some of those flood hazards, and also provide rockfall protection in those areas where we have the worst rockfall.
All right, and there was one question that came directly to me, not to Emily, so I'm going to read this one as well. And this could be a question for Nate. Have you ruled out considering a new alignment to the south over the ridge above the river?
South
To the east.
over the ridge above the river.
Probably means to the east of the river.
Might be McMinn Bench, Nate. Is that possibly?
We did look, that was one of the alternatives Cam addressed that was considered, but ultimately dismissed. Had some critical resource impacts that drove us away from that alternative.
All right, thank you. And I don't see any other questions right now, so I think we can probably go ahead and I'll tell everybody about making formal comments. So we do want to invite the public to submit your formal comments on the project, and there are a few ways to do this. First, through the National Park Service Planning, Environment, and Public Comment website, or PEPC. And this is the preferred method. The link to the PEPC website is provided in this slide and will be pasted in the chat box. You may also hand deliver comments to the park's headquarters in Mammoth Hot Springs, Wyoming, or mail to the park at the Yellowstone Center for Resources. Please note that comments must be received by March 12, 2024 to be considered. Please also note that this presentation and the recording will be, the presentation will be available on the PEPC website, and the recording will likely be available on a SharePoint site. That information will be going out to the public through the PEPC website. And Cam, I'm now going to turn it back over to you to close out the meeting.
Well, I'll just say thanks, Nicole, for facilitating, and thanks to everybody for the great questions. Sorry about the cap on 100. We'll bump that up for the next meeting on Wednesday. If we still don't get to everybody, I have no issue with scheduling a third one of these if necessary, so we make sure everybody has an opportunity to kind of see what we're thinking. But thanks to everybody and the team, and Nate, thanks for your great partnership at Federal Highways, and this is super helpful in helping us make the right decision as we move forward. So that's it. Thanks again.